when people ask me, so what do you guys do? I'm like, the simplest answer is we try to get government to leave you alone. And we're always going to advocate for the Utah Fits All Scholarship.
Ankle bracelet them, they don't
exactly.
need to be in a box, and
Right.
have them out there working.
It's $15 a day roughly for somebody to wear an ankle bracelet. It's over $100 a day to have them in county jail. It's $40,000 a year to keep them in prison. I mean,
Prison makes people worse. It doesn't make them better. I'm sorry, that's just the way our prison system works.
Yeah, it's not corrections. Even it can be called Department of Corrections, but it's really
You're not correcting anything.
the Department of Vengeance is really really what it is. Because I mean that's what justice without mercy is. It's vengeance, and then mercy without justice is chaos.
Welcome out to God and Country. I'm Uriah Kennedy. This is Ingrid Bettridge. We're here at the Utah State Capitol building again. We're going to be talking to Libertas today, which is a national organization that kind of monitors legislation going in different states. They're actually founded and started right here in the state of Utah, so their primary location is here, and they try to get stuff done here in the state of Utah and then take that out to other states. So it's going to be a lot of conversation about current bills that are going on right now that they're trying to get passed and just trying to put their 2 cents into it. So Libertas is more of a libertarian type of organization, is my understanding.
Nonprofit organization, lean libertarian. It's nice to have a neutral ground person, and I love getting opinions from constitutionalists and libertarians and people who aren't specifically Republican.
Yeah, they're very, very neutral. They don't like arguing or saying anything about anybody, very neutral, and he'll tell you, it's just strict freedom. Strict freedom is it taking freedom away from the people or giving more freedom to the people, and that's essentially all they care about. So we're going to have a great conversation. We'll see you after the conversation.
This is Uriah Kennedy with God and Country, and one of the main reasons why I live in the great Rocky Mountains of Utah is because I am constantly getting out into the mountains and going hiking, camping. There is nothing, absolutely nothing that I enjoy more than getting out and hiking the great landscapes that we have here. From the great national parks we have, Bryce Canyon, Zions Canyon, to the great mountains of hunting and fishing here in the Uintas and other major attractions we have in the Rockies. Everybody has the ability to get out and just enjoy the great outdoors across this country. One of the best and only ways to do that is with the proper equipment. You have to go out with the proper equipment, whether that's tents or sleeping bags or coolers or lanterns or cooking utensils or apparel that you need to keep yourself warm or keep yourself dry. It doesn't matter what it is. We know that Coleman makes everything, absolutely everything in the outdoor arena. I have used Coleman products since I was a little kid, and now I'm sponsoring them. Everybody knows and trusts Coleman. Coleman's been around for generations. Your parents have had it. Your great-grandparents have had it. Coleman has been around for a very, very, very long time, and we all know the Coleman products. We want to thank Coleman for helping us with this channel. We would ask you to click on the QR code that's popping up on your screen or the link that is in our description and go to Coleman using the QR code popping up on your screen or the link in the description to buy all your outdoor needs and equipment from Coleman. It has to go through our QR code or through the description in order to support this channel, so we would ask you to support the channel. Click on the QR code or the link in the description and get all your outdoor equipment, your tents, your sleeping bags, your camping utensils, anything that you possibly need for the great outdoors. Get it through the QR code or the link in the description.
Well, Jason, welcome up to the God and Country podcast. We're glad to have you on. We're here at the Utah State Capitol building in the Senate offices. We might get kicked out here in a few minutes and have to find some other space, but we're good right now. So kind of let our audience know, what exactly does Libertas do and how are you guys involved in what goes on up here at the Hill?
Well, thanks for having me. The Libertas Institute has been around for about 12 years. It was started by Connor Boyack. He's our founder, he's our president. And when he started this, he was just a concerned citizen. He's a web developer by trade, and he started coming to the Capitol and going from committee to committee to floor times and talking about how he disagreed with a lot of things that they were doing. And he didn't understand the process. He didn't really know what he was doing. And people didn't disagree with the points that he's making, but he didn't know what he was doing. He was going about it the entirely wrong way. And so there were some people who sat him down, said, this is how you have to go about it if you want to really make change. And so he started making those changes, and he started getting more people on his side. And he got some people that wanted to back him in an endeavor to create a nonprofit to do this work. There are many, it became a think tank. So a think tank is just an organization that is there to educate the public. And so there are many think tanks around the country. Sutherland Institute, the Ken Gardner Institute, those can be considered think tanks in Utah. And so eventually his organization started to grow, and they started hiring more people, and then he started creating new initiatives. And last year we underwent a little bit of a rebrand, and we created what was called the Libertas Network. And so the Libertas Institute is just one part of that network now. And so the other parts of the network include the Tuttle Twins books. So the books, the cartoons.
I know the Tuttle Twins books. I didn't know it come from you guys.
I know the Tuttle Twin books.
That's all us. And so we also have the children's entrepreneur markets. We call them the kids markets now. It's just farmers markets for kids. Teaches them how to sell, how to make things, how to be an entrepreneur. And we run those all over the country. I think we were in, I want to say over 40 states last year, and it started here in Utah. We also have a polling firm called Overton Insights. So we've run some polling on some of the issues that we were involved in before the session started, because we wanted to get an idea. It was like, how popular are our ideas? Or are we just, kind of being crazy out there and throwing things in the wind when people don't really support it? And what we found is most of the public, they support most of what we're doing, and so we also have what's called Praxis. Praxis is probably the newest part of what we do, and it is essentially a boot camp for people getting ready to go into the workforce. So instead of spending 4 years going to college, not knowing what you want to do, taking on a lot of debt, you spend 6 months to a year doing this program, and it gets you ready to work.
Is this nationwide?
Yeah. And so I think it's an online program, and so anybody can do it. We've had hundreds of graduates so far. It's relatively new.
And what would somebody hope to get from, what skills are they gaining from that?
Lots of soft skills, but it also teaches you basic office skills. It depends on what track you go into. I don't know a ton about it because it's not really my area, but all of the stuff is available on libertas.org to all of the different little parts of our company now.
That sounds great.
So that's one of our, Connor wrote a book called Skip College, and this is coming from a college graduate, and he's saying skip college, and so it is just one small portion of a bigger thing, and it's what we call the pyramid of impact. And so the idea is down at the bottom, this is where you get kids involved. You get them involved in the kids markets where they learn what it's like to buy, sell, trade, create, and generate revenue, generate income. And what that does for them, not just monetarily, of course, but it builds their confidence. It teaches them, okay, I've got to think about how much it costs me to buy this thing that I have to then transform into what I want to sell. Do people even want to buy it? That's another thing. What's the market for this? And then once they figure that out, we get them reading the Tuttle Twins, which is a series of books which teaches kids common economic concepts, but puts it in a form that they can understand. It's really geared towards
The Tuttle Twins books are really simplistic. I really like those books.
Oh, yes. My kids have been, it's funny, before I even applied to work at Libertas, we had been using the Tuttle Twins books in our homeschool curriculum for years.
Really?
Yeah. And so when I told my wife that I was going to apply at the Libertas Institute, she's like, that sounds familiar. I'm like, yeah, it's run by this guy named Connor Boyack. She's like, we buy his books. I'm like, all right, I guess I'm doing the right thing then. I'm I'm going to the right
meant to
place.
be.
Maybe it was meant to be. And so then once they get the ideas ingrained in their heads through the Tuttle twins, as they grow, as they get older, maybe they go to praxis, maybe they do go to college, whatever it is that they want to do. But it instills ideas into them that then they will become supporters of our policy work that we do with the Institute, that affect everybody in the state and a lot of other states too, because part of what we do in the Institute is take our ideas that we've cultivated here in Utah, started here in Utah, and take those to other states. So one of those is portable benefits, which is essentially creating a pool of money that gig workers can use for their own benefits, or just independent contractors. Then it doesn't qualify them as an employee. So DoorDash, Lyft, Uber, they can offer something above and beyond what they already give their drivers to entice them to keep working for Uber, Lyft, or contracting with Uber, Lyft, and DoorDash. And they can use that for health insurance, car insurance, maintenance, whatever it is, but they're still independent contractors. So we got that passed in Alabama and Tennessee last year. There's probably close to a dozen other states that are running that bill this year.
Is Utah?
We passed it 3 years ago, 3 sessions ago. Utah passed it, first in the nation. And so Pennsylvania has a limited program that they're running right now. And it's been pretty successful so far. I mean, it's a slow build, trying to get people to realize what it is. We get some pushback from big labor, because they think that everybody needs to be an employee so they can join a union and do the thing. But this doesn't really have anything to do with that, because these are people who are wanting to stay independent. They want to be able to work on their own time, not on somebody else telling them when to work. Could tell you how many Uber drivers that I've spoken with. They're like, yeah, I just do this when I drop my kids off or whatever athletic practice or whatever they're going to, and I don't want to sit there and wait for them, but it's too far to drive back home. I'll just drive for Uber for a couple hours.
I know a lot of people that I just want to do it a couple hours. I don't want a full-time job. I just want the extra money. There's a lot of home moms that will send their kids off to school, do it just for the few hours between time they go into school and time they get out, and that's all I want to do because I want to be home with my kids. And
then if there's days they've got other things going on, they can do those other things. They don't have to drive.
They can clock in and clock out whenever they want to in those things.
Yes, and we're very supportive of people doing what they want to do. When people ask me, so what do you guys do? I'm like, the simplest answer is we try to get government to leave you alone.
That's a very good answer.
That's it. And they're like, wow, that's awesome. Do more, do better. I'm like, we're trying, but we've got a lot of headwinds in front of us that stop us from what we're doing.
It's incredible how much the government wants to intrude. They always think, well, we need to do this better and do that better, but the only solution they have to doing something better is to do it themselves.
Yes.
And not let people manage themselves. I mean, everybody's adults, everybody's smart. Why do government officials feel like every single time they get into office that it's their purview to kind of be in charge and supersede everybody's own free will?
I think we can all get lost in our own bubble and look at things from our own point of view.
There's a bill going on right now that where they're trying to give DCFS more power to be able to just, without a warrant, just go in and just barge into people's homes and start deciphering whether the kids are being abused or not, and see if they can just take kids away. And I'm like, no warrant, no judge, no nothing. Just they don't need anything.
But that's because they're myopically looking at something horrible they saw where it was the child was in danger, and they're not thinking about that it opens the door to all the others who weren't doing anything wrong.
So I was a legislator in Missouri for 8 years, and I remember making a statement on the House floor. I was a representative in the House, and I said, government often creates what I call a regulatory merry-go-round. So they'll see a problem, they'll pass a law, create a regulation to fix this problem, but then they create another problem, and then creates another problem they have to try to fix. And eventually they get all the way back around trying to fix the original problem because they created all these other problems that then affects the original one. And it's just a constant thing.
We spoke with a senator recently, and he was telling us most of the time we're just fixing our original bills.
Oh yes, there's a lot of cleanups.
We're human. We're just doing our best.
And there are unintended consequences that you can't really foresee, and because a lot of times you don't know how it's really going to work once it's deployed essentially in the real world. And
Or how people are going to figure out ways to abuse it.
right. There's abusing it, there's getting around it. There's all kinds of different ways that it's going to affect people that you just don't know. I mean, we're not omniscient. Nobody is, and so at least nobody right here is omniscient, right? And so because we can't tap into that power, we're doing the best we can.
It sounds like the prescription drug industry, like they create this drug and look at it and think, well, this is really going to help this. And then it creates a myriad. And soon you're taking 16 drugs
Yes.
to manage the symptoms.
Yeah, if you hear all the side effects on the TV commercials, like, I'm not sure I want all those. I think I'm fine with the problem.
May cause death.
Yes.
Ask your provider now.
Yeah, I wouldn't be upset if the FCC disallowed those commercials just because. But I understand that there's a free speech right and whatnot. But just personally, we wouldn't have a
We're
position
the
in that.
only country where you can advertise drugs.
Yeah,
Right.
and so I'm not going to say that we should do that. But just personally, I can't stand them. Yeah. So that's kind of who we are. That's what we do, and we try to focus in specific policy areas. We have 5 policies that we have researchers, experts in their field. So we do education, local government, privacy, criminal justice, and tech and innovation. Our education analyst used to be an elementary school teacher and principal. Our local government analyst knows more about planning and zoning than I will ever know and ever want to know. I mean, this is somebody who gets really, really deep in the weeds of all the little nuances of it. And I am so grateful that he's with us, because I don't know if we can find anybody else that wants to get that deep.
Where did they get their background from?
They learned it. So 20 years ago, they were living in Provo and wanted to build an ADU for his grandma, and he wasn't allowed to do it. And so he went kind of down this rabbit hole of figuring out what the deal was. And he's a journalist, a tech writer by trade, and it just led him into a position to where he did a lot of research. And he, at the time, Libertas needed a new local government analyst. And he actually applied for the tech and innovation analyst, but they're like, well, with your background, with your story, you fit local government. And so that's where he's been ever since. Our criminal justice analyst was a prosecutor for 10 years and has seen a lot of the issues within the criminal justice system. And so he brings some credibility, to all of those discussions that anybody who's not hasn't been a practicing attorney could never do it, and because I guess you could say we're often on the side of the defendants. It's just asserting their rights. All of those rights listed in the Bill of Rights has to be upheld by somebody, has to be promoted by somebody, and that's what we do. We obviously don't think that we should just let everybody go that does something wrong, but we don't want to over-criminalize them. Because the research has showed that putting them in prison longer doesn't do anything for them.
What I'm seeing a lot in particularly in the prison area is we are over-criminalizing the minor crimes.
Yes.
And then we're way under-criminalizing the bad ones.
Yes.
And I don't know how we did the opposite of what we should be doing, which is going easier on the lesser crimes and getting a little harsher on the harder crimes.
Well, I think the lesser crimes need to be paying restitution. Like, why are we housing people not having them
sticking everybody in prison.
working and having to pay back those that they wronged? And
something that I've been advocating for a couple of years is, with the advances that we've had in technology, why aren't we using those to our advantage?
Ankle bracelet them, they don't
exactly.
need to be in a box, and
Right.
have them out there working.
It's $15 a day roughly for somebody to wear an ankle bracelet. It's over $100 a day to have them in county jail. It's $40,000 a year to keep them in prison. So what do you think is actually better? When somebody, maybe they didn't show up to court, so they have a failure to appear. Well, what should we do with that person? Should we throw them in jail because they didn't show up one day? Maybe there was some stuff going on, their car broke down, whatever it was. It's not really an excuse, but there's a lot better ways to handle that situation than throwing them in jail. Because once they're in jail, you get nothing out of them.
meanwhile, their victim also gets nothing out of it.
Exactly. And so if we can provide a way for them to avoid being incarcerated for something that is relatively low level.
Ankle bracelet, house arrest, go
Something.
to work.
Yes.
Start paying back your penalties.
Yes.
You have to now work 2 jobs to pay back the person that you wrong.
But We found, if you've seen last year, there were close to 80 bills, I think, that were either increasing penalties, creating enhancements, or creating new penalties altogether. I look at every one of those as a tax increase, because every time one of those is passed, somebody's got to stay in jail longer. Well, now you're paying extra money for that person to stay in jail, prison longer, whatever it is. And, all of the things that has to go into that. So they can talk about wanting to save money, cut taxes all they want, but they can't then say, well, we're going to keep your taxes high, maybe not raise them, but we're going to have to keep them high in order to pay for this. There was a bill earlier this year to renovate one of our old prisons because they're running out of beds. Department of Corrections did a presentation to the Law Enforcement and Criminal Justice Committee in the interim saying, we're running out of beds. And most of it is recidivism. And most of that is driven by technical recidivism. They didn't commit a new crime per se, but it was a parole violation. It was a probation violation. They didn't show up, they didn't pay their thing, whatever it was. But they
like in non-violent crimes?
Right.
Why are you putting it back in a box?
Exactly.
It's completely senseless.
But that's what they have chosen
Well,
to
and
do.
I think some people think, well, then you're not being tough on crime, but I think there are better ways to be tough on crime.
Yeah.
Missouri has a thing where I served called drug court. I'm pretty sure they have those here.
Mm-hmm.
And I went to a graduation once. And the thing about the drug court was that with that graduation, somebody who went through the program, spent 18 months to 2 years going through it, and they graduated and they got released from the court. But at the same time, it was a court day too. And so there was one gentleman in there who had gotten pulled over and lied to the police officer who pulled him over, saying he wasn't on parole probation. Come to find out he was. Judge is like, you're spending 2 days in jail, starting now. Immediate. It's that immediate and certainty of punishment that deters crime. Because most criminals are not thinking about, they're not going to care. It's like, well, if I get caught, I could get 3 to 5. I'll probably get that pled down to a year, maybe 6 months or something, and then I'm out in 3 months for good behavior. They're not really thinking about that. They're thinking about, what are my chances of getting caught? Is it worth the risk?
Yeah, they don't know.
And then even if I do get caught,
They don't even know what the jail time even is.
right?
They have
Do I
no clue.
Am I really going to get punished for this? Yeah, probably not. I've gotten off 4 or 5 times already. What's one more? I can get away with it. And so they do it. So if we were, I guess, more severe in the certainty, if we were more severe in the immediacy, instead of letting it drag out for months and months and months, then I think that would be a better deterrent than just keeping them in jail longer, because a lot of them, you ask a lot of people, and I've had a lot of relatives who've been in prison, they'll tell you, most of the time they're sitting around swapping stories about how to become better criminals.
Yeah.
What'd you do? You did that. Well, how'd you get away with it for so long? And they learn how to be better criminals. It doesn't make any sense.
I have that same problem with youth who, I guess I'm really ignorant in why we sometimes try youth as adults, and we decide we're going to try them as an adult, and I think, but they're not an adult. Their brain was still 11 when they took the lives of their parents. So I don't know how that gets decided, but then they put them in with hardened criminals, and they are tutored very well in becoming a lifelong
Instill the
criminal.
hardness into the criminal.
Yeah, and I don't understand why we do that.
I mean, to kind of finalize the comments on the whole prison subject, I think the other big issue is drug people. When you're consuming drugs, you're not necessarily dealing drugs. The last place you should go is prison.
We're really big advocates of getting them help.
Yeah, they should be getting help. They should be getting help to work, getting education, something like that.
Yeah.
I've always been a proponent for, like, there's several different levels of federal prison and then state prison, right? You got the camps that are club fed, right?
Right.
Then you got your low security, medium security, high security, then your supermax. I think the camps, they should just completely get rid of them. You can satisfy that whole problem with just an ankle monitor and home confinement. Let them go out and work. I'm also a proponent that if somebody is going to school, and if it's state funded school, because if you're funding prison, you might as well get them an education, right? Put them into school, fund it for them, give them some kind of a grant, and then just say, okay, you can stay out and you can have home confinement as long as you're maintaining blank grades, right?
Right.
And then that half these people that have this recidivism are going to go out and get a job. They're going to feel better about themselves. Their self-esteem is going to go up. They're going to be able to go out and say, I can actually do something.
I think they need to put back into the system after that too, though, because, you know, why do you get a free education with...
Yeah, but you can always say, okay, you're going to have to pay this amount of money for so many years, but it's not costing...
I think it's just the trade-off is they're giving up years of their life, you know, and so the taxpayers are kind of on the hook for that.
Yeah.
You know, I mean,
prison makes people worse. It doesn't make them better. I'm sorry, that's just the way our prison system works.
Yeah, it's not corrections. Even it can be called Department of Corrections, but it's really
You're not correcting anything.
the Department of Vengeance is really what it is. You know, because I mean that's what justice without mercy is. It's vengeance, and then mercy without justice is chaos. You know, and so that's why the symbol for justice is the scales. They must be balanced. They cannot be unbalanced. You know, and so I think what we've seen over the last couple of years in the legislature is an attempt to unbalance the scales. Not to say that it wasn't unbalanced before, you know, but it's always fluctuating a little bit. But when it goes too much one way, you'll see a backlash to it. You know, and then it'll go the other way. And what we want to do is try to keep it as balanced as possible all the time. There's always a tension. There's a push and pull through all of it. And as we learn more, as more research comes out, more studying is done, and you know, conditions change, as technology changes, and we're able to use technology to help us. The 24/7 program, the continuous alcohol monitoring, the ankle monitoring, these things weren't available 15, 20 years ago. I mean, there was no social media. There was a lot of places there wasn't the internet, you know, and so they didn't have the ability to utilize these new tools, but now we do, you know, and so we shouldn't shy away from implementing them just because, oh, it's going to cost a little money, because in reality is it costs a whole lot less money than sticking somebody in jail. And it's not just the money, it's what it does to them while they're in there, what it does to their family, what it does to the broader society. You know, when the legislature comes back and tells the taxpayers, yeah, we're going to have to spend this much money to revitalize this prison or renovate this prison because we have too many prisoners. Well, whose fault is that?
All those low-level people, they don't get back out into society very well. It just doesn't happen. They barely can find work. It's really low-income work. It makes them desperate. That causes the recidivism because they're desperate. They can't even support themselves.
Right.
Where there's so many other ways you could fix that. But yet every time the tough on crime conversation it's always tough on the entry level easy crime. And yet the crime they should be tough on is the violent stuff. I mean, because we're letting
Child molesters out?
Child molesters out, rapists out, where even murder is all of a sudden getting a 20-year sentence or 15-year sentence instead of life or the death. And so
we would advocate against the death penalty, mainly just because, well, for two reasons. Government is often wrong.
Yeah.
You know, so what makes you think they're not going to be wrong sometimes in court cases, in a murder case, right? So I mean, and that happens every year.
There's extreme cases. I mean, there's serial killers out there. There's people that are blatant, all-out murderers.
But it's still cheaper to keep them in prison for life than it is to execute them, because they get a series of appeals.
And we need to get rid of that.
Well, there's a bill to do that. We would disagree, but there's a due process element to it. And because these people generally never have any money, taxpayers are on the hook for both the prosecution and the defense. So once they get through that whole thing, they could have spent 4 or 5 lifetimes in prison for what it costs to actually execute them.
Really?
Oh, absolutely. You know, it's generally 10 to 15 million to execute someone through all of the appeals and all of the court costs and all of the attorney's fees.
Crazy.
And you know, that's guaranteed. I mean, that's a Supreme Court precedent that they're allowed these things. So it's not like you could change it a whole lot. You could tweak it on the margins. I think that's what House Bill 495 from Representative Perucci is trying to do. But they're still allowed certain process. But at the end of the day, even if that goes into effect, it's still cheaper to keep them in prison. Even if they commit murder when they're 20, 25, it's still cheaper to keep them in prison for life than it is to execute them.
Yeah, and I don't want to execute anybody that's, I mean, involuntary manslaughter, all those type of things. I mean, if it's just blatant and you've done it a few times,
there's an argument to be made. I still think that
there's certain people that just shouldn't be around anymore.
Okay, what about child traffickers?
Yeah, I mean, we can go down a rabbit hole and say, okay, who's this and who's that?
Yeah.
But I mean, and for an organization that we worked to repeal the death penalty years ago, we haven't really revisited that. And I would say that given the current climate, the time is not right to try to revisit that, but we're still opposed to it. And I'm just, as an individual, my faith tells me, thou shalt not kill. That doesn't mean, there's no exceptions to that, right? And so because I know government is often wrong, and everybody has the ability for redemption, maybe buried way, way down there.
No, yeah.
But, are we served by just...
I know that God doesn't ever give up on anybody or stop reaching out to even the
Right.
darkest dregs of society.
So, yeah, I mean, that's a whole nother debate, that we can have.
What are we doing on the education side? What's your biggest hurdles there?
So there was actually a bill just passed out of the Senate today that allows people to buy, have you ever heard of micro schools? A micro school can be something like a piano teacher teaching piano out of their house. That's considered a micro school because it's not quite a private school. It's not a public school. It's something a little different. Mathnasium, a Sylvan Learning Center, or it could be somebody who's running a farm and wants to teach kids how to farm. That would be considered a micro school. And it's small. It can only be up to, I think, 100 or 150 kids. There are limitations on the size of the facility, so you can only have so many kids per square feet of actual teaching space. So you can't shove 100 kids into a closet, and
You can't have a learning center, right?
right. So I mean, it's just, but it's different, because it can be single subject or it can encompass all of the subjects. It really depends on who's doing it. We found that there are a lot of former educators who start micro schools because they get to focus on one area, and it's something that they enjoy. So if you're, let's say you're a retired math teacher who just enjoys it, you could it's like being a tutor, except you have a formal school. You have a schedule, people sign up for it, people pay you for it. They can use the Utah Fits All Scholarship to pay for it, just like they can for private school. And so we passed a bill originally to allow micro schools in all zones. And you can have it in any type of building. So you can have it in a strip mall, you can have it in a former school building, you can have it in your house. If you have it in your house, you still have to adhere to all of the fire codes. We worked with the state fire marshal's office to make sure that that was in code because we want the kids to be safe, especially if they're going to be in a basement. So you have to have the special egress windows to be able to fit through to get out because something bad happens and you can't get out going upstairs. You need it away. That's fair. That's fine. And so what the bill does this year is says that an individual is allowed to purchase a home for the purpose of turning it into a micro school. But the city or the county where that house is, whatever the jurisdiction is, they still get to control parking, traffic, all of those different things. They still have to abide by the limited space. So if they're only doing it in the basement, there's only a certain number of kids that you can actually have attend there at any given time because of the way the law is written. So
But then can the city start taxing you as a business?
Yeah. Yeah, because you have to register, you're a business, you're a school, but it's a profit-making school. So that bill just actually got passed today. And so we're pretty excited about that.
Yeah, that's pretty exciting.
And then of course, we're always going to advocate for the Utah Fits All Scholarship. And there are going to be some tweaks made to it this year that we're supportive of.
Are they going to increase the funding on that?
Not yet, I don't think. I mean,
things
it's
got
possible.
cut, I know.
Yeah, it was changed last year, and it's caused some issues. But I think we're going to be able to work through that. Private school is more expensive just because they have to pay for buildings, right? They have infrastructure just like public schools do. And while homeschoolers, it's just the house generally, right? And so it's just a little different situation.
If someone was saying, now I can no longer afford, what do I tell them? They can no longer do.
And it's you guys probably know this, as kids get older, they get more expensive. They don't get dazzled with the cheap toys. Now they want nice toys, more expensive toys.
Especially when they get our age. Then they want really
my
nice
toys are gross. It's disgusting. But I work for it too, so I get to enjoy some of that. Whatever my wife lets me have. That's essentially what I get. Fair. It's
We
fair.
always say that men don't grow up, our toys just get more expensive.
Yes, absolutely. But, when kids get into high school, They got to take the driver's ed. Books get more expensive. They're getting ready. Maybe they're getting ready to go to college. It just gets more. And so, yeah, there is a difference between a 6-year-old starting school. They don't really need a whole lot. So it makes sense to give them a little less. But to cut down some of those high schoolers who maybe they're ready to go to college, maybe they're doing dual credit, they're going to a community college to earn that, because you see a lot of homeschoolers that graduate when they're 16, 17 years old. Most colleges will tell you that the kids most ready to enter college are homeschoolers. They do the best, just because they
know how to learn independently.
Well, yeah, they get one-on-one attention, more often than kids at public school. And it's a trade-off.
And they finish the same amount of work that kids are doing in 6 hours in like 2.
Yes, maybe less, so we homeschool our kids, and I argue that we do a whole week's worth of school in a day, because we can sit there and focus, and then we can get to go do other things, and we use everything as a learning opportunity. There was just last week, I think my kids were asking me about a noise that our van was making, and so that led us down the rabbit hole of going online to see how an engine works. We can do those things.
That's awesome.
It's just so much. There's so much out there that we can use to educate our kids. We don't have to stick them into a building where they have to sit still and be quiet for so many hours a day in order to educate them. We have a whole lot out there that we can educate them with.
I watched a documentary called The Death of Recess. It was on Angel Studios. I thought I knew all the stuff that was going on and how we came to be here. I really recommend anybody watch that, but that was incredible to see.
I don't think we've seen that, but
public school system just became a political pawn.
Yeah, so we generally stay out of the debates about internal school policies unless it involves criminalizing the student or the parent. And that's been talked about a little bit around the truancy debate, but for the most part, the legislature has left that alone, and so we kind of stay out of it. So unless it is really getting into those issues, we want to let them do their thing, and make public school however they want to. We're still going to advocate for choice. So if it makes sense for you to send your kids to public school, that's fine. I would argue that it works just fine for 80% of the kids that go. It's not enough for 10% of the high flyers, and it's definitely not helping the 10% who need more help. And to me, that's where a choice program is targeting, is the kids that don't fit in there. Because there are some kids, most kids, they're going to succeed because of public school, but there's some kids that succeed in spite of public school because it just doesn't fit for them. I would have argued that I was one of those kids, that I made it through, but I barely graduated because I was interested in everything else that was going on and not actually school. That changed once I went to college when I was older, because that's what I was focused on, and I was paying for it out of my pocket. So it was just a different scenario, but I just wasn't challenged enough, and I was in a poor rural school that didn't have a lot to offer. They didn't have the resources. They didn't have gifted programs. They just didn't have AP programs, anything like that. And because I came from a very poor family, I didn't have a lot of good role models to look to really push me, and my family dynamics were a little less than ideal, I guess you could say. And so there was a lot of chaos in there. And so I was just kind of left to my own devices to figure it out, which is why I signed up to join the Navy the day before my senior year started, because I realized that my options were extremely limited, and I didn't want to stay where I was. I wanted to get out and do something, and so that's what I did.
There's a lot of people choose that, but the problem is there's a lot of people in your poor communities that want to get out of the slums and get out of the ghetto, and military becomes the only option. It's the only way they can get out.
And so we see the school choice option as a good option for them, where they wouldn't normally be able to get their kids out of public school.
Well, obviously we got kicked out of the Senate room, but we like the view out here better. So we're just going to keep going with our conversation about what's going on in Utah education right now. So what are your main goals this session?
Well, our big goal for this session with education was the micro school bill.
Yeah.
And then other than that, it's just maintaining the funding that the Utah Fits All Scholarship is getting. We, of course, would love to see an increase in that, but we know the revenues aren't the greatest this year, and I know the state has some other initiatives that they're trying to get through, try to put a lot more money into putting water into the Great Salt Lake. So we understand that at a minimum, we want to keep it to where
So
it
do you
is.
feel like there's not enough revenue in public education? Because
Oh, I think there's plenty of revenue. Plenty of revenue, but that's a different fight that we generally stay out of. Would we like to see more put into the scholarship? Absolutely. We know that the lawsuit is still out there. The Supreme Court decision is still waiting to come down, but we're hopeful, and really we think that the law is on our side on this, and even if it were to turn out not in our favor, we're confident that the legislature would find a way to reinstate the program and probably change the laws in order to change how everything is funded.
any problems or do you have your eye on anything to do with any of the DEI in education?
Not really, because again, that's an internal school policy that we generally stay out of. So we would like more kids to get into the choice movement. And so if their parents see these things going on in school, we want to give them another avenue to educate their kids. So we realize that fighting the inertia within public schools, at least from our perspective, with the very limited resources we have, is extremely difficult. So instead of fighting that giant battle, we're just going to we'd like to provide an alternative. And say, if you don't like what's going on here, try this. Maybe this will fit what you can need. And so you can send your kids to private schools. So if your schedule doesn't allow you to homeschool, it doesn't allow you to utilize micro schools, then you can put them into a full-time private school and maintain your schedule the way you need it to.
Yeah, it's been a great asset for people.
Right, and so, but you get to choose what's best for your kids, what's best for your family. And then you get your kids out of the environment that, is detrimental to them. And so, again...
Whether that's other kids at schools, a bullying situation, or they just don't do well in the academic situation. My wife's a school teacher. She's been a school teacher for close to 20 years now. And she'll tell you that there are certain kids that just do incredibly well in that school environment. And then there's other kids that when you're one-on-one with them in the classroom, they excel at reading, they excel at math. And the second you stick them in the test environment, they lock up, they freeze up, their brain just this is a test, all of a sudden I've got to perform, and it's just that immediate. Now when literally 5 minutes earlier they're doing fine with everything. And so when you tailor it to the child, and parents are allowed to tailor it to the child, you get so much better results out of this. And yet we had such a massive fight about vouchers, and we're taking money from the system, and so many people are fighting that, particularly the teachers' unions were fighting this like crazy.
Yeah, I mean, they're getting billions and billions of dollars.
Right.
It's well north of $5 billion. We get $100 million. That's a very, very small percentage of the overall pie of education dollars. And as we've seen through the applications that have been submitted every year, it's a growing movement. You're starting to see more and more states implement ESAs in different forms, whatever fits their state. Arizona and Florida are going gangbusters with their school choice programs because parents realize that what is there for everybody isn't for them.
Who knows their child best than the parent?
Right. And so, I mean, like you said.
Well, DeSantis is going gangbusters on everything he's doing right now. I mean, that guy's doing phenomenal work.
When you talk about test taking, it's a skill that you have to develop over time. And there was an old cartoon. It was a cartoon drawing, like a newspaper cartoon, showing a bunch of animals in front of a table and saying, your test is to go climb the tree. That's what we do to kids, because there was an elephant, there was a giraffe, there was a dog, there was a squirrel, all these different types of animals, yet they all had to do the same thing, and we're going to judge them based on their ability to do this one thing that may or may not fit them. I would have been the squirrel. I was really good at taking tests. I didn't do much of anything else when it came to school as far as homework and whatever. I just didn't care. But I was great at taking tests for whatever reason. And so it fit me, but for some of my friends that I went to school with, highly intelligent people, very successful in life, but it just didn't fit what they were able to do.
Yeah.
But yet we're going to judge them, base their future off a test that may or may not actually, it's really not a good indication of their potential.
Some of us just don't learn while sitting in rows of tables and chairs inside with no light
Right.
and a small window. That's just, some of us aren't conducive to that.
We have one child that he was on the autism spectrum. He had sensory processing disorder, and so he had a real issue with sitting still. We had a special pad for him that he sat on. We put elastic bands around the legs of his chair so he could kick at it. We put poster boards in front of him so he wasn't getting distracted. I had to change out the lights in our basement because we had fluorescent lights, and I had to change in LEDs because he could hear the buzzing of the fluorescent lights and it would distract him.
That's annoying.
Oh, yeah.
And so
Anybody on the spectrum, that would be very, very frustrating.
He's grown out of a lot of that, but he's still one of those kids where trying to get him to sit down and focus is extremely difficult sometimes. So allowing him to get up and walk and talk and learn in that environment and do it orally, instead of sitting down and reading and getting a lecture, and we're having an interaction. That allows him to learn better than any other environment, but definitely better than a public school environment can provide. It's not really a knock on public schools; they're just doing the best with what they can. But they don't have enough for some kids. And this is what the program provides: is the opportunity for those kids that don't fit into that 80% mold to do their best, in the way that fits them. So
We've been confronting both Musselman and Harper and a few other senators about how much money the state is putting towards schools, which is a lot of money. But the issue that we're seeing a lot is all that money is getting stuck in the districts and not getting down to the teachers, because they keep putting more and more money to it, but yet teacher salaries aren't going up. Classrooms are still looking for donations from parents. They don't have enough school books in the classrooms. And yet with the public information that is out there, you can see what district salaries are. Granite School District, we pointed out many times, has 100 people in the district with well over $100,000 a year salaries, or $200,000 a year salaries.
Yeah.
It's just insane how much money gets caught up in those higher levels or not making it down. And
so when
this solves a problem.
When the Utah Fits All Scholarship was implemented, there was a second part to that bill, and that was a straight increase to teachers, because Utah law allows the legislature to appropriate a certain amount of money directly to the teachers and completely skipping the school districts.
They should do that a lot more often.
There's some issues with that, because the schools need to essentially grade their teachers, and reward the better teachers. And so they still have to have a hand in it. But as you've seen,
it's not taking the hand away from them. It's trying to incentivize the good teachers to stay good teachers and not go admin. Because they're looking for more income. They got to support their families. And so a lot of the good teachers stop becoming good teachers and they go admin. They go to the district, they do something else. So they get those higher wages. But yet, if we would actually give that money, not taking away the reward, because we definitely want to get rid of bad teachers and reward the good teachers, but still, all the money stuck in the district.
A lot of this is because of the federal government and the money that they give out, and all of the mandates that come with that, all of the reporting, all of the administrative headaches that come along with that. The state does it as well. It requires teachers, you got to spend so much time filling out, you got to do these papers and fill out this paperwork and do these forms and give these reports, and it takes them away from teaching. And so in order to implement that, the schools have to spend money to comply. It's a compliance fee. It's basically saying if you want to be a school, you have to comply with all of these things that the legislature tells you to do, the state school board tells you to do, and so that costs money. It's like a bank having to comply with all of the laws of Dodd-Frank and all the stuff that came after the 2008 financial meltdown. That costs money. And that means I pay higher interest rates for everything, because they have to make money to pay those compliance fees somehow. It's kind of the same thing, where if the schools have to comply with all of these rules and regulations and reports and everything else that they have to do, they got to have somebody to do that. So they got to hire more people, and it's not cheap. And that means less money going to the teachers. And so if we allowed teachers to teach and just teach and not have to do all this other stuff, maybe
If we
we'd have
got
more.
rid of the bureaucracy, got rid of the red tape, there'd be a
Yes.
lot more money going to our teachers.
Yes,
Yeah, we find that in everything that government touches, though.
Yes, it is.
Government's got to figure out a way to screw everything up. Our freeways and our highways could be so much cheaper if we got rid of the environmentalists, the activists, got rid of the red tape, half the studies that needed to be done, because you could have millions spent already and still not even have broken ground yet on a lot of projects. So government figures it out. If there's a way to waste money, they're going to figure out how to do it.
Yes, absolutely.
Absolutely.
I would say our biggest initiative this year is what we call the military crosswalk. And so,
Oh yeah, I know about the military crosswalk because we've spoken about it with Tammy, Flake, and then a few others with the VFW and others. So I love this initiative.
yeah, and so the program was originally done in Pennsylvania. They're the only state in the nation that has done it as holistically to all of their occupational licenses. So what it does is it looks at the state's occupational licenses, it looks at all of the jobs in the military, and it finds a way to get those military members into an occupational license without any more headache. So occupational licensing is built on 3 E's: education, experience, and examination. Service members have the experience, right? If there's an exam component in order to get an occupational license, that's fine, they can take the exam. What they probably don't have is the education, especially if they're enlisted, because if you're enlisted, you don't have to have a degree. If you're an officer in the military, you have to have a degree, except for a very small portion of it. And so that means when they get out, in order to keep doing the thing that they were already doing, trained by the federal government, your tax dollars went to train them over a number of years that they're experts in, good enough to protect the lives of our country, the way they do. They can't do it in the civilian world. Oh, you got to get this degree. That doesn't really mean a whole lot. It doesn't make them better. It's just the state doesn't know any better, right? This is for the average civilian that has no training, no experience, nothing, and they don't know how to translate that for members of the military. So about 2 years ago, we found out what this program was, and we decided, we brought it to the state and went to DOPL, went to the Department of Veterans and Military Affairs, say, can you do this program? And they're like, that's great, but we don't have the resources to do it. We just don't have the manpower to do it. So we're going to do it for you. So we spent about 18 months researching all of our occupational licenses, taking what Pennsylvania had done, and then we updated it to include all of the job changes that were performed by the Air Force and the Army last year, and incorporated all that together, put it in one big shiny package for the state, and presented that in October to the Commission for Veterans and Military Affairs. Senator Baldery is our sponsor, and DOPL and the Department of Military Affairs, they have been great to work with. They've been great partners on this. And they're ready for it. We were going to put an implementation date of January of 2027 to give them time to get it all together, but they said our stuff was so thorough that we want to do it right now. So there's no implementation date on it.
Yeah.
So essentially what it is if I'm getting out of the military, and let's say I am a behavioral health specialist in the military, in order to do that in the civilian world, you probably have to have a bachelor's and probably a master's degree. But what this says is the state is going to look at your job description, look at your job duties, look at the training that you got, and see how that matches up with our license. And if it's pretty similar, you can apply for the license and we will give you the license.
Does anybody in the military supervisory have to write a... No.
Because it's all in your DD-214, your discharge papers.
Discharge
Okay.
paperwork.
So it's all there, exactly what
Your
you've
entire
done.
record's there.
Brilliant.
Everything you've done.
Everything is there. And so there are some components that you may have to go into the military records to the VA to get for specific schools, because they can't list everything on a 214 because it's not that big. Mine is just front and back, so they couldn't list everything on it, but there's ways to get it. It's kind of like a transcript of your service time. So any extra schools, any extra training that you did, it's all in there. They can take that and compare it to what the license requires in order to do the job, to get the license, and to figure out, okay, is it pretty similar? Well, yeah, then you get the license. And so it's still got to be relevant. I've been out of the service for almost 26 years. What I did, I don't remember how to do it. I worked down in the engine room of an aircraft carrier. It was at the power plant. So we made all of the steam that powered the ship. pushed the ship through the water, launched the planes off the boat. We made all the fresh water. We made all the electricity, right? I don't remember how to do hardly any of that stuff. So I wouldn't qualify for what's called a stationary engineer's license, which is a power plant operator, because I've been out too long. So there is a bit of a relevancy,
but when they're fresh right out of the service.
Fresh right out? Yes.
I mean, this hits home for me because I got all 4 of my kids are in the military. Mm-hmm. My oldest son was a mechanic for air conditioning as well as generators. Come out trying to figure out how to do something, can't get licensed to be an AC guy. My second 2 sons, or my second son is a C-130 mechanic. And he's got to come out and get licensed to even work on aircraft, and he'd have to fly to a completely different state to even go to school for that. But yet, he said, there's nothing about an aircraft I don't know how to do.
Yeah.
I mean, I could look at planes, because he flies on commercial planes all the time. And he says, I can look at that wing from the seat in the cabin and tell you exactly what's going wrong with it.
Yeah.
He's just that skilled with it. Mm-hmm. And then my last 2 sons are actually Black Hawk helicopter mechanics. Mm-hmm. So being able to transfer all that and not have to go to the additional school and not have all the additional expenses. But I'm also hearing that not only are they going to transfer that information to the license, but they're not even going to charge the veteran for the license. They can literally just walk in and get it for free.
I don't know about that.
That's what Baldry was telling me, is they're going to try to even waive the fees for the veterans.
So 2 years ago, we got them to allow, what Senator Baldry, again, ran the bill. So if you're on deployment and you do have a license, so if you're this mainly applied to reservists and National Guards. Mm-hmm. So if they go on temporary active duty, maybe they go on deployment for 6 months or a year, and their license expires while they're gone, they'll get a grace period to get it reinstated. Without having to go through the whole thing.
I heard about that too.
Yeah, we worked on that with her to get that passed. So I mean, you wouldn't think that a quote-unquote libertarian organization, it would be for stuff like this, but I'm a veteran. The lady who did the vast majority of the work on the crosswalk is an Air Force veteran. Our education analyst is a Marine. I'm not saying was a Marine, because they'll say they're always Marines.
I'm always a Marine.
He's got the crayon collection to prove it too. That's just an inside joke between the Marines and the Navy.
I hear that one all the time.
Yeah.
It's not as bad as the jokes between all the branches in the Air Force.
That is true. That is true. I'll just leave them alone. It's too easy. I'll just keep the low-hanging fruit there.
So where does a veteran start? They're hearing this and they're like, I can what? Where do they go?
DOPL. Department of Professional Licensing. So DOPL they control all of the licensing. So you have to go apply with them in order to get a license. We have all the boards and commissions, but they're advisory boards. In some states, the boards and commissions actually issue the license, and their department just kind of houses them. They're the administrator of it, and so it's actually the boards and commissions that do it. And so that's why you can't really do it from a federal level, because every state's a little bit different. States require different licenses. Some states require for a license in Utah, sports agents, but they don't always have that in every other state. And that's why we have a department called OPLR, the Office of Professional License Review, to look at our licenses and say, does this have anything to do with health and safety? Because that's the original intent of licenses, was health and safety. It's like, somebody doing this job endangering the public by doing it? Should they have a certain amount of education? I'm not going to go to a doctor that got their degree online, right? That read Wikipedia, and figured out, okay, I'm a doctor now. I know how to do this, right? I want my doctor of gone to medical school. I'm not saying that you shouldn't be able to do that, but I'm not going to, right? So I understand that need, but there's some things like, do we really need to have a license for an interior designer? We have a bill to get rid of that too.
That's kind of dumb.
Yeah, there are 4 licenses we're trying to get rid of right now. And sports agents, does that have anything to do with health and safety? Not really. Those are contract things. And so does the state really need to put up a guard to say you have to do these things in order to do this job? Yeah. Not really. Because it doesn't have anything to do with health and safety. And so that's what OPLR does. So if I just said at a boilerplate level, DOPL, that's where veterans need to go. Military members thinking about getting out, we want them to stay in Utah, because we know they're good people. We know they're great workers. We've already paid to train them. Why would we make it hard for them to stay here? Especially when we got a major military base here. In Missouri, where I came from, we had Fort Leonard Wood, which is one of the 2 Army bases where they do basic training.
So that's where my kids did do basics. So I've been on that base a few times.
And there's also Whiteman Air Force Base where all of our B-2 bombers are housed. So we have 2 major ones. This is something Missouri needs as well. I'm going to be taking it there soon too. That's one of the things that we do, that I said we take our ideas to other states. We're trying to push this idea in a lot of other states. Once we get it through in Utah, because Pennsylvania, the reason they haven't done it, it was actually their Department of Professional Licensing that did the program. And they got a grant through DOD to get it all set up, and so they're not actively going out and expanding it where we can, because that's what we do. We advocate.
Yeah.
So we're hoping to deploy that to as many other states as possible, over the next couple of years. But it's going to take work. We're nonprofit, so we survive off of donations. So if you know anybody that likes to donate,
do you guys have like a membership program, or is it just?
We don't have like a membership. It's just we have recurring donations.
Just recurring donations.
Yeah, the vast majority of our donors are from Utah.
This is Uriah Kennedy with God and Country, and one of the main reasons why I live in the great Rocky Mountains of Utah is because I am constantly getting out into the mountains and going hiking, camping. There is nothing, absolutely nothing that I enjoy more than getting out and hiking the great landscapes that we have here. From the great national parks we have, Bryce Canyon, Zions Canyon, to the great mountains of hunting and fishing here in the Uintas and other major attractions we have in the Rockies. Everybody has the ability to get out and just enjoy the great outdoors across this country. One of the best and only ways to do that is with the proper equipment. You have to go out with the proper equipment, whether that's tents or sleeping bags or coolers or lanterns or cooking utensils or apparel that you need to keep yourself warm or keep yourself dry. It doesn't matter what it is. We know that Coleman makes everything, absolutely everything in the outdoor arena. I have used Coleman products since I was a little kid, and now I'm sponsoring them. Everybody knows and trusts Coleman. Coleman's been around for generations. Your parents have had it. Your great-grandparents have had it. Coleman has been around for a very, very, very long time, and we all know the Coleman products. We want to thank Coleman for helping us with this channel. We would ask you to click on the QR code that's popping up on your screen or the link that is in our description and go to Coleman using the QR code popping up on your screen or the link in the description to buy all your outdoor needs and equipment from Coleman. It has to go through our QR code or through the description in order to support this channel, so we would ask you to support the channel. Click on the QR code or the link in the description and get all your outdoor equipment, your tents, your sleeping bags, your camping utensils, anything that you possibly need for the great outdoors. Get it through the QR code or the link in the description.
And so we're very grateful for that.
Well, you're nationwide right now. You're doing stuff in every state. So looking at all the states and what you've been doing, what has been the scariest piece of legislation you've seen so far?
Oh, I don't know. There's a lot.
Well, give us one on top of your mind. What state and what are they trying to do?
Oh, we don't really pay a whole lot of attention to what other states are actively trying to do. I mean, I could say pick a blue state, but you can pick a lot of red states that have some really dumb stuff. That's just what government does.
No,
right?
we've talked about Oregon for a long time.
Right.
About what their Department of Education has done up there in vilifying, and literally they're able to label parents bullies now.
Yes.
And they can transition, medicate your kids without you not only getting your permission, but they don't even have to tell you, don't even have to know about it. Mm-hmm. So there's some pretty scary stuff. And I hear that Colorado just passed the same law that now they can transition kids, drug your kids, not just no parental permission, but no parental knowledge at all.
I'm hoping that sanity will resume at some point.
Some of these blue states, you wonder.
Yeah.
And then you're talking about these programs for schools, that these smaller classrooms, these smaller schools, and then you look at what's going on in Minnesota with all the Somali fraud that's going on up there, and you're like, well, how are you going to curb the abuses? Because At the same time, you're initiating some great programs. Is there oversight? And who's doing the oversight? And how often do the oversight? Is it on-site oversight, where they're actually going to these places? So there's curbing the waste, fraud, and abuse is a big part of this as well.
So we still have a small staff. I mean, we're a small institute, so we don't actively monitor what's going on in other states. It's more about taking our ideas to the other states. So we focus on
part of
what we can do.
these laws. Are you looking at them and saying, do they have parameters to?
Yeah. So when we one of the bills or one of the laws that we try to implement in other states because of the kids markets, is we call it the lemonade stand law. Can a kid operate a lemonade stand in their state without having to pay taxes, without having to get a health inspection, without having to get a business permit? Can a kid be a kid?
Food handler's permit.
All of those things, right?
Ridiculous.
And so we've went into other states and had to research and see what their laws are regarding this, and then figure out how do we make this law change work for their state. Some states are already pretty good. Some states need a lot of help. And so we have to look at how their state operates and do that research, do that investigation, and then find a like-minded legislator that would like to sponsor, the lemonade stand law in their state. We did this in Missouri last year, and it's not perfect, but it's still better than it was. And so it'll allow kids to be kids.
I saw a YouTube video about that. I don't even remember what state it was, where the law enforcement was literally kicking the kids off the street. I'm like, don't you have a million other things you could be doing right now instead of responding to some neighbor who's complaining about kids selling lemonade on the corner?
The lemonade was too warm.
Yes, maybe that was it. It wasn't sweet enough.
Yeah.
They didn't put the right sugar in it. I don't know. But I mean, so that's kind of how that operates, and we do that with the other policies that we try to export to other states. Is we look at the landscape, what's the likelihood of passage? So because we have a limited staff, we have limited resources, we look at states that are fertile ground, for accepting our ideas. And this is where we have partners with other think tanks across the nation. And we talk to them on a regular basis. We'll talk to trade groups. We'll talk to chambers of commerce. We'll talk to business leaders and say, what's the landscape look like? Is this something that you could be interested in? Your state, do they need this? Are they ready for this? Do you think your legislature, the way it's made up, would be amenable to accepting something like this? Because I don't want to pour a bunch of resources into a state that's never going to pass it. It doesn't make any sense. So we're always looking for opportunities, and there's a little bit of a snowball effect. We get it passed in Utah, then maybe we go to Idaho, then maybe we go to Montana, then maybe we go to another state, and their surrounding neighbors. States are like this. It's kind of weird. They don't like it when their neighbors do something really cool, because then they're like, well, why do they get to do the cool stuff first? We should have been doing that stuff.
Yeah.
And so then they want to jump on board. So it just snowballs. And so we saw that with sandboxes. We're starting to see it now with portable benefits because it's good policy. And that's what we want to do, is show, and a lot of states too are hesitant to be the first. They want to say, well, who else has done this? Did it work? What were the pitfalls? What were the growing pains? And there's
part of that is a lot of legislation now is they don't just have to consider, can we get this legislation passed? They have to consider, well, once passed, will it survive a lawsuit? Will it survive the court system?
Yeah.
Which is sad, because we've got a judicial branch that's usurping power in both the executive and the legislative branch.
Yes.
And we've pointed this fact out many, many times. It's one thing to take something to court and a judge can decide whether something is constitutional, yes or no question, right? Simple as that. That's where their power ends, is you've decided it's not constitutional, you've given your reasons behind it, it gets kicked back over to the legislative branch or the executive branch, you guys need to fix this. But what's happening nowadays is the judges are saying, okay, this is unconstitutional, I want you to submit to me your recommendations, your maps, like with Prop 4 and anything else, I'm going to make the decision on it and essentially legislate from the bench. And that's where they're usurping authority. Then on the executive side, where the executive branch should be enforcing the law, now you got judges trying to enforce law over the president, over Congress people, over businesses. We're going to enforce this. We're going to send the cops out there to arrest. And so it's where we have a judiciary that's usurping a lot of power. And where that's coming from is from a left that feels like they're losing power and then they're supporting the judges doing what they're doing right now. So since they feel like they've got the support, the latitude, they're taking the power.
I think there's a lot of legislatures that have given too much of their authority to the executive branch, and
Or the judicial branch.
and it causes a lot of problems because they're the ones that are supposed to make the rules and make the laws. But then when they say this law allows the Department of whatever to create rules and regulations, that causes problems because those departments aren't held to account for what their actions are. They don't have voters.
No.
Supposedly they have a governor that runs things, but you know how that works out. And legislatures, by and large, don't impeach agency level, department heads. And so that causes a lot of consternation.
They create our own deep state. It
is.
doesn't go away.
And what I like about Utah compared to where I served in Missouri is the legislature actually guards its power very, very, a whole lot more than other states do.
Very judiciously.
Very judiciously. So Missouri, I never ran a bill that allowed any department to make any rule or regulation. I'm like, I am the rule and regulation. I'm the legislator. That's what I'm here for. I'm not saying it's completely lazy. There's a time and place for it, but doing it just to do it because you don't want to do the hard work is an abrogation of your duties. It's a dereliction of duty is what it is. That's what the federal Congress is right now. All of the issues that are going on is pretty much all caused by Congress saying, we'd rather do other stuff. You handle it.
Yeah.
And so
that's why we have a Department of Education that's got too much power. That's why we've got an EPA that's got too much power.
Which was instituted by a Republican.
Yep.
So I mean, it goes both ways. Both sides do it. It's not an either or. Anytime any one of them is in power, especially if they have both the House and the Senate, they'll just give it away freely because we'd rather go raise money. We just want to run for re-election. We want to do all these other things instead of doing our actual job. So anyway, going back to the crosswalk, we're hopeful. It's just waiting for one more vote in the House. It does have a fiscal note because the Department of Professional Licensure needed one person to actually administer the program, and I would advocate for that because it is huge. And I want them to be able to stay on top of the job changes because the military will do it whenever they want. And so they need somebody to be able to go in there and research that and figure out, okay, what's the new thing now? And make sure that our veterans are taken care of.
Well, they need to be. I mean, look at the suicide rate amongst veterans. And the vast majority of the causes of that depression is when they get back into society, just like getting out of prison, they just can't assimilate. They can't get back in. No one's taking them. No one's hiring them. Their skills aren't transferring. They're starting they have to start at the bottom of the totem pole again. It's just not fair for any of them to have put that much on the line and not get anything for it.
Senator Bollery said it in committee that the number one cause of suicide among veterans was just a lack of economic stability. And we're hopeful that the program, while it can't alleviate everything, because not everything in the military translates to an occupational license. I mean, if you're an artilleryman in the Army, there's no civilian equivalent to that. There's no license for that, right? So we understand that. But for the ones that there are, we're hopeful that it will help them. I guess some of our other policies that we work on, privacy is one of those. And so we have a bill with Representative Kyle to address third-party privacy. And what that means is the government needs a warrant to access your data from a third party. So if they want to look at your bank records, if they want to look at your cell phone records, they need a warrant to get those. They can't just go to...
Well, that should be obvious, right?
Well, you would think, but here we are. We're one of the few states that actually have that law. And then
so you can't be the Biden administration that's going to these cell phone companies, all this, and saying, give me all this information. I want to start spying on these parents who are going to these school board meetings, these city meetings, and just give me all this information. Or they're going to Facebook and telling them, we want you to give us all this information. I mean, it's a lot of intrusion.
Right. It is, and a lot of this started when George Bush was president, W. Bush, not the senior Bush, with the creation of the Department of Homeland Security. I mean, that was a complete overreach of government authority, in creating this whole new agency whose sole purpose in life is to spy on citizens. That's what they do. homeland security. We have an FBI, we have a CIA, and
Well, I understand
CIA
why they
watches
did it.
things.
They wanted to get the agencies speaking with each other, and it kind of
Still
helps
have-
organize that. But now there's still departmental conflicts and stuff like that.
I mean,
but
but there's still, it's still essentially a big domestic spy campaign. At the end of the day, that's what it really is. And so what our bill does, and then there was a court case last year in Utah where a gentleman was convicted of committing a crime, and I can't remember what exactly it was, but the state, the government, law enforcement had gotten some records from the federal government that they would have had to get a warrant for. And the judge ruled that because the law didn't state that law enforcement couldn't go to the feds without a warrant to get that information, that it was lawful for them to do that. Even though it said in the law, cannot get. It didn't say cannot get from anywhere in the state. It just said cannot get this information without a warrant. And so that should have been a blanket ban, but legislating from the bench, they interpret it in a different manner. And so now this goes back and tries to fix that somewhat, but kind of the cat's out of the bag. So it's not everything we want. So if there's if the feds offer the information freely, then the state can use that. The state can't go ask the feds for the information or ask the feds to get the information, but there are times when there are joint operations going on between the federal government and the state, especially with drug interdiction and things of that nature. And so if they're already working together, it's a partnership, then they can use that information. But if it's a state investigation and like, I can't get this information for whatever reason, they can't then call up their buddies at the federal government and say, hey, can you get this for us? Because we can't get a hold of it. No judge will sign this warrant for us. But if we get it from you, then it's okay.
Yeah.
In that case, they wouldn't be able to use that information.
it bypasses the warrant.
Because it bypasses the intent of the law. We also had another piece in a data privacy bill, it's House Bill 450, with Representative Schallenberger, that actually got taken out of the bill. It's called Truth and Surveillance. So Utah, we have truth and taxation hearings, right? So whenever your local government wants to raise your taxes or create a new tax, they have to hold a hearing, a public hearing, and tell you exactly what they're going to do. We wanted the same thing for surveillance. So if your government is going to put in license plate readers, any kind of camera system, drones, whatever it is.
Facial recognition.
Whatever it is, they would have to hold a public hearing and let the public have input on how they're going to be governed. That's all it was. It doesn't tell law enforcement how they can use it. It doesn't tell law enforcement, say you can only set it up here. It doesn't say that the law enforcement has to tell all the places that they're actually implementing it. It just says you have to have a public hearing and let the people have their say. Well, law enforcement lost their minds, saying, we can't do this, and how are we
That's
going to
like
catch
right at the
anybody?
very beginning of the Constitution, right?
Exactly.
It's we the people. We're governing ourselves. We don't have some supreme leader government that gives us our rights, right? We have the rights.
Yes. And
If
so,
you're going to do something as a government, you're our elected officials. We get to tell you what you get to do or not do.
Exactly.
So why is that such?
well, they're special. Right? And they have a hard job. There's no doubt about it. They have a hard job. It's a tough job. It's a dangerous job, right? And so
But you're not telling them they can't do it. You're just telling them, look, the people are in charge. You just got to let them know what you're going to do.
This happened in Salt Lake City recently when the city was thinking about implementing or expanding the use of license plate readers with a company called Flock. And the people said, no, we don't like this idea. And the city council backed off, said, okay, we're going to hold off on this. The people said, this is not how we want to be governed. In our founding document, in our birth certificate, which is the 250th anniversary of this year, it says, government derives its authority from the consent of the governed.
Of the governed.
Why can't I give my consent? All I want is the ability to have some say-so. I'm not telling you exactly how you can use it, but let's just talk about it. And they don't even want to have that conversation. So that's going to be made a
That's where
study
dictators
item.
start.
That's going to be made a study item for the summer, for the interim. And so we're hopeful that will develop into something that is acceptable to law enforcement. To me, I really don't care if they accept it or not, but that's how we want to be governed. They don't govern us. They don't get to tell us how they're going to do things. This is why the civilians are in charge of the military. Somebody has to have oversight. And it's our local officials who should have oversight of how we are going to be governed. Right? That's what we elect them to do. And so that's as simple as it was.
Yeah.
And it was
Seems pretty constitutional to me.
right. But
I'd love to follow up on that during interim.
yeah, and so hopefully that will come out, and law enforcement has said, and they vowed to work with us on coming up with something that is workable, and I trust them on that. We did a facial rec bill a couple of years ago. We're the first state in the nation to put some guardrails around the use of real-time facial recognition. I helped write that bill, and I work with law enforcement on it. I work with the AG's office, I work with Highway Patrol, and we came to a place where it's pretty workable. I think there's still more work to be done on it. Did you know right now in Utah, law enforcement doesn't have to have a warrant to use facial recognition. So if a law enforcement officer wants to use facial recognition, they get their supervisor's signature, and then they go to the Department of Public Safety, and that department actually does the facial rec match. So if you have a picture of somebody, a suspect for something, they'll run it through their database to tell you who that person is. What I want to do with that is separate the difference between, when it comes to real-time surveillance, what I call positive and negative surveillance. So in a negative surveillance, that would be somebody has, if they're looking for me, somebody has a picture of me, and there's cameras out here, and they look at you, no, yes, that's the person you're looking for. In positive, it says, oh, this person here, this is Jason, this is Ingrid, this is Uriah. It tells you exactly who that person is. Those are two different types of technologies. And with the proliferation of AI, that second type, that positive, is going to get a whole lot easier.
A lot easier.
Because all it takes is somebody uploading all of our driver's license pictures to this program, and it's just constant. Every camera looking at everybody all the time, telling you exactly who they are, where they're going. It can see your eyes. It can determine who you are by your walking pattern, your stride length, how much you swing your arms.
That's
it can tell your
crazy.
height, your weight, your hair color, all those things. Same thing with the license plate reader. Supposedly it's just your license plate, right? But it can tell what your car type is, what year it is, the color, dents, dings, where your tires are a little low, how much wear you have on your tires. It can identify all that stuff through that license plate.
Too much information.
And Flock is so pervasive around the country. They cover, I want to say, over 65% of the entire population of the country. And they essentially almost give their cameras away because they make their money off of their database, the subscriptions. It's the data that's important.
Yeah.
And so for them, that's what's work. Representative Chevrier has a great bill for LPRs to clean up the language that we helped put in place a few years ago, where it limited where law enforcement could actually use those. It limited to like missing persons, so like an Amber Alert, Silver Alert, active investigations, stolen vehicles, stuff like that.
Well, I know in the Charlie Kirk the investigation that they were like perusing the crowd and they were trying to use, but it was fallible. I mean,
Yeah, if you look at most commercial technology, you see this in a lot of retail stores that implement facial recognition technology. It gets a lot of things wrong. It'll flag people as being, oh, they shouldn't be here, when it's like, well, no,
I know a lot of stores are trying to do that for shoplifters, right? They
Yes.
recognize a shoplifter, and that person walks back to the store, it automatically flags them.
Yeah, and it's an issue with the technology just not being ready for prime time. It's especially bad at identifying minorities. For whatever reason, it's just not good at it. And so there's been multiple lawsuits in many states where somebody has been flagged as a shoplifter or whatever by the facial rec cameras, the technology, and it turns out that wasn't who they were looking for. So then because it costs that business a lot of money with the lawsuit, they're like, yeah, this isn't worth it. We'd rather just be shoplifted. That costs less money than it was cheaper than getting sued.
Perfect.
Yeah.
So I mean, that's just what it is. So when it comes to privacy, that's the kind of stuff that we do. We don't really delve too much into data privacy, like the privacy of your information. Like if you sign up with your internet provider and they sell the information for all the websites you're visiting to third parties or whatever, that's two independent private individuals or entities contracting with each other. You can choose to do business with them, or you can choose not to do business with them. Now, where we come in is what happens when government gets a hold of that information. So now we're starting to consider looking further upstream to that original contract and say, does that really need to be in there? Because we don't want government to end up with this information.
Yeah.
When I was in office, I was approached by a company called YouGov that they use a constituent management software. So we would use that to interact with our constituents. So if they sent me an email, I could see who they were, where they lived, when did they vote, stuff like that. And they bought data from all of these other outside sources, and it was your buying, your purchase history, your credit rating, all this stuff, and they would build a profile on you. And so if I went into their system and I wanted to know how many 30 to 35-year-old women with at least 2 kids purchased a firearm in the last 6 months, it could tell me who those people were.
Yeah, I know there's systems like that. Yeah.
And there are many states.
That's targeted marketing.
Yeah, and I'm like, there's no way I want government to have this information. So I wouldn't let them in the door. Because I was in my last term in office, I was responsible for all of the contracts signed by the House of Representatives. I was like the chief administrator in concert with the chief clerk for the House. And so any contract that was over, I think, $25,000, I had to sign for it personally. That was my job.
And there's one thing
I'm like,
to have.
no way will they ever be, allowed in this building. Yeah.
I mean, it's one thing to have businesses have that so they can have targeted marketing because it's more effective for businesses and most people don't mind it, but government shouldn't be anywhere near that.
Political parties do the same thing. So when I was running for re-election into my 3rd term, I bought data from the Republican. I was a Republican, and I bought data from the Republican Party to find out who I needed to target for that election because I had a Democrat opponent, and I wanted to make sure that I did well. And when I got the information, because it had like, okay, here's your list of voters in your district.
So the voters, not just the delegates.
Yeah, it was voters. So in Missouri, we had open primaries. There was no convention. There was none of that. It was just an open primary. And so it would tell you who was a hard Republican, who leans Republican, who's independent, lean Democrat, hard Democrat. And I went to the top 10 people who gave me the most grief, I guess you could say, my haters. And over half of them were listed as Republicans. And they gained that information through generally purchase history. And I could imagine that they were getting that, so, okay, do they purchase firearms? That means they must be a Republican. Like, well, no, I live in a country, everybody has firearms.
Yeah.
That's why we don't have any gun crime, because everybody has guns and everybody knows how to use those guns. And everybody knows that everybody knows how to use those guns.
Yeah.
Nobody's having any gun crime. I had that debate with some inner city Democrats a lot of times, like, this is why we don't have gun crime, and you do, because in my district, we're poor, we're rural, lots of drug problems, but there's no gun crime because everybody knows they have guns. Everybody's got guns, lots of guns.
Yeah.
The cops will tell you, we're never going to go take anybody's guns because we're outgunned. That's never going to happen.
Yeah.
Not only is it unconstitutional, it's just, we're going to get killed. But in your district, everybody lives on top of each other, and nobody has guns, and all the bad people know it. So they don't have any qualms about attacking somebody because the odds are that person doesn't have a gun. You do that in my district, you're going to get shot. I had plenty of neighbors that had signs out there on the side of their house saying, break in at your own risk, survivors will be shot.
Yeah, I got it in my house, so.
Right. So I mean, that's the way it was living in the country. But I mean, so some of that data that's out there, you wouldn't believe how invasive it is. And it doesn't take much for these companies now, to fingerprint your phone, your IP address, and track you across everything.
It's just so dangerous.
But how do you explain to the person that leans more liberal, where they're like, what do you care if you're not committing a crime?
I would say right now that given with the current administration, it always swings. It depends on who's in charge.
Yeah.
So when Republicans are in charge, especially right now, Democrats want all the privacy. When Joe Biden was in charge, Democrats didn't want any of the privacy. They thought the government should be able to do everything, and Republicans wanted all the privacy. This is the problem with the big government. We don't want anybody to be in charge. We want the government to do as little as absolutely possible. That way we don't care. It doesn't matter who's in charge. Most people in Switzerland don't know who the president of the country is because most of the power is down at the local level. If you want to immigrate to Switzerland, your neighbors have to vote to allow you to immigrate. That's how you get to be a citizen in Switzerland. You have to live there for a while. Your neighbors vote on it. If they don't like you, if you're a jerk, you're gone. They get the vote. That's how I want us to be. It shouldn't matter who's in charge because the government's doesn't have the authority to do very much anyway. So it doesn't matter. Provide the services we need to provide and then leave me alone. kind of,
I would
goes back
agree
to our
with that.
stance of, that's why we're here.
Help us keep the peace, help the fraudsters from committing fraud. Other than that, get out of my life.
Right. The other big thing that we're doing as far as local government goes, so we've had a long relationship that we've been trying to build with the League of Cities and Towns and trying to get them on board with some of our initiatives for affordable housing. Moving from Missouri to Utah was not just a culture shock in different environments, and going from a very rural area to a suburban area, but just the price of housing was triple what we had in Missouri. That's not breaking sweat. It was easily triple, and we just found that there are a lot of other options for allowing people to start. We would love people to have starter homes. We're talking about 1,000 square foot, 1,200 square foot, 2-bed, 1-bath home. You get married, you have 1 kid, you have 2 kids. They can sleep in the same room.
Sure.
Then you're ready to move up. So then maybe you go to the 3-bed, 2-bath. You keep having kids because you've got a low house payment and you're doing better in your career as you grow, you make more money. Just maybe you have some more kids. Now you want to move up to the 4-bed, 4-bath, because as your kids get older, they spend more time in the bathroom and you need more bathrooms than just one for the kids and one for the parents. And so, but right now, everybody's starting off because of government regulations with the 4-bedroom, 4-bath, 3-bedroom, 2-bath at best, which is $500,000.
Yeah, guys, every city government out there is trying to get rid of high-density housing. No
Right.
condos, no townhomes.
Right. And so you got to
I
start
don't know
somewhere.
why there's such a frown on that.
Well, a lot of people don't want it because they're afraid that it's going to
To bring in-
diminish, it's going to decrease their property value. When actually the opposite is true, because if you have a 3-bedroom, 2-bath house, if that's the smallest house in your neighborhood, you are the floor. It doesn't get any cheaper than that. So you're depressing yourselves without even realizing it. But if then you allow some 2-bedroom, 1-bath houses in, those now become the floor, and it bumps up your value. You're worth more because now there's something worth less in your area. It doesn't drag you down.
I think
it
they
moves you up.
confuse renting with ownership and
Right.
just think because it's small, but they don't understand that the average owner takes care of what they own because they own it, and there is a difference.
I think they just frown on the big apartment style, condo style, 3-story buildings going up everywhere, that massive parking
Yeah,
lots.
because most of those are rental, and so there's no
not
ownership.
condo
but-
owned.
Yeah, and so I mean,
So what are you proposing?
So we would love to see just allow more starter homes on small lots. Representative Ward had a bill that died in committee this year that would have allowed for more of these small lots to house starter homes. That died in committee, but one thing that we are going to have this year is detached ADUs are going to be statewide now. But it still allows the cities to have some regulations about size, placement, infrastructure, things of that nature that obviously necessary, especially if you don't have the infrastructure to build an ADU. It doesn't make any sense for you to build one, but they have to allow for them in some shape or fashion. It's something that we've been pushing for. I told you earlier, our local government analyst tried to build an ADU for his grandmother in Provo 20 years ago. And what made him really mad was his garage went all the way to the fence line. And he was going to turn his garage into an ADU. And the city said, well, that ADU, because now it's going to be an ADU, it has to be set back 3 feet. It was okay to have the garage there because nobody was in it. But now as soon as grandma gets in there, we put a bed in there.
Stupid rules.
Now it's got to be set
So
back.
she doesn't get hit by a car, or what? Why the setback?
Well, the garage was against the fence. I don't know why. It's just
Most of those are grandfathered in, because I was a builder for a long time, and just the setback rules, the city ordinances, they just become very ridiculous. And once the city has the ordinances, they enforce it to the letter, and there's just no leniency.
Yeah.
They don't change it.
yeah. And
They'll make you tear stuff out. They don't care how much you have to spend. It's
Yeah, and they won't tell you up front. It's like, well, you can't do that because this is what it is. They're like, well, you're gonna have to figure it out. Here's our ordinances, and we'll come back later and tell you if you did it right. It doesn't make any sense either.
Yeah.
I'm not saying every city does that. I'm not saying Provo did that. And I mean, at least Provo told him, no, you can't do that, before he spent the money to renovate his garage.
But the cities have a problem with that, but then they also have problems with their building permits because the cities are charging so much in building permits now. It's becoming insane.
Yeah.
I know to build a house in some cities is like 25 grand just to get the building permit, which is obscene because it's just an added tax is all it is we need to fluff our budget. So we got these houses building, let's add 10 grand, 15 grand to the building permits.
Yeah, and our biggest, I'd say one of our biggest issues is when city council or planning commission or just anybody with the government says, we want to make sure it fits within our community. The community should have a choice. Like, well, there's no constitutional right to that. You have a constitutional right to your property, to use your property as you see fit. So if you want to put an ADU on it, you should be able to do that. If you want to have a property without a garage, you should be able to do that. Make carports great again, kind of thing. Parking pads, whatever fits for you, right? But I mean, if you think about the word community, what's the root word of that? Commune. What political philosophy also shares that same root word? Communism. Communism, nobody owns anything. There is no private property. And so if we're giving up our property rights to the broader community, that's never our property. We don't ever have ownership of it. In my mind, we should never have to pay taxes on it because if I don't own it, why should I pay taxes on it? So if I'm a homeowner and I want to build an ADU and the city comes back and says, well, that doesn't fit within our community, we don't want you to have something like that, the city should have to pay your property taxes because they've essentially commandeered your property. Why should I have to pay for something that I have no control over? Especially taxes. You're taxing me on something that I have no control over because you've just told me that. So you pay it. I'll pay you rent and you pay it. That's essentially why can't it work that way? Because you've taken it away from me. You've taken away my constitutional ability it's in our Constitution. It's in Utah's Constitution that you have the ability to use your property as you see fit. I tell groups all the time, it's like you have no constitutional right to increasing property values, but you do have a constitutional right to use your property as you see fit. So as much as you don't like it, that's how,
I would agree. Zoning laws and ordinance laws are becoming way overboard. And property taxes are obscene because you can have your house paid off and still have it foreclosed on.
Yes.
You stop paying
There's actually a
property
Supreme
taxes.
Court case in the U.S. right now going on. I think the arguments were heard earlier this week about the legality, the constitutionality of taking away somebody's house and selling it in order to pay back taxes.
Agree.
I think that's, one, it's just stupid. Why would you do something like that? But I mean, it's just mean. It's really just mean.
Just mean.
And it makes no sense.
Especially when they're elderly. I've seen half the time that happens to the elderly. They've
put a lien on it, and so whatever the house is sold, you get your pound of flesh out of it. But to take it from them and sell it out from under them and put them out on the street, just so we got to have our money, it doesn't make any sense whatsoever. Yeah. So
at minimum, I think they should get rid of both income tax and property tax when you reach a certain age, and just.
Well, I mean, you could say that, but then it just puts the burden on everybody else. And so it's no different from Social Security, where it's a pyramid scheme. Essentially putting the burden on, and this is why the birth rate is such a big thing. It's like, how are we going to pay for all the baby boomers retiring if we don't have enough workers to replace them? We're a mushroom. It's really big at the top, and then it gets really narrow with Gen X. That's who I am. And then it starts to widen out with millennials and Gen Z, but there's still not enough replacement to pay for the people who are there. It's a giant pyramid scheme. And so you end up in the same position is, and it's different too because property taxes generally are going to pay for the schools. We can have that argument too, because that's where most of it goes. But I mean, I would say that everybody benefits from those city services, from those county services equally. So everybody should, this is the argument for a flat tax. Everybody pays for the same stuff. Why should we punish those who just do a little better? Everybody gets the same benefit, so everybody pays the same rate. And even then, the people who make more end up paying more. The people who have nicer houses end up paying more. We have an argument against that too. We're going to work on that one in the future. So you shouldn't be punished just because you have a nice house on a tiny property. It should be the size of the property. How much infrastructure does that take up? That determines what your property value, what your property taxes are, not just how much have you improved it? But it's an easy way to do it. It's pretty cut and dried how they do it. I would argue that what they're trying to do with limiting how much your property taxes can increase year to year is a good thing. Because then it incentivizes cities, if they're going to do it, to do small increases more often instead of waiting for 20 years and kicking the can down the road and say, oh, we're going to have to increase everybody's property taxes by 25% this year and putting some people in really bad spots. It's better for them to do a little bit over time. And so I'm hopeful that will work out.
Well, Utah had a major problem a couple of years ago because our property taxes just skyrocketed all of a sudden, just went up. But the tax base is based off a percentage, and they're supposed to drop the tax base because they didn't need to have this overabundance of income all this time at the state level.
Yeah.
And they didn't. So everybody's property taxes went up with their property value.
Because the legislature froze their ability to change the rates. Because of COVID.
And yet people can't afford more money just because their house value went up all of a sudden.
They did it.
Yeah.
They can fix it, but I mean, that was something that we did in Missouri was in Missouri, it's really egregious. It's called a personal property tax. And so you paid taxes on the vehicle that you already paid taxes on when you bought it. Now you got to pay taxes just because you own it. Livestock. You have one head, one cow, you pay taxes on that every year. You got a tractor, you got a boat, you got a motorcycle, you pay taxes on it every year.
Wow.
And so what we did because of COVID was we made it, instead of just a 1-year snapshot, what's your value on January 1st of that year, it was a 3-year rolling average to absorb the shocks of major economic strife. So COVID happens, things go crazy, the value skyrockets. I shouldn't be on the hook for that because let's say I paid $100 for my truck last year. It's not now all of a sudden worth $200. It's gotten older, it has more miles on it, but now your formula says that. This would say, okay, what was it? It was 100, it was 110 this year, it's 100 last year. Now it might be 200, so the average of that. So maybe it's 140, 150 bucks, but it's not as much of a sticker shock. Then as the value comes back down, it lowers back down, smooths it out a little bit. They also had a thing to where your assessed value could only go up so much each year. And so that affected your actual property tax rate. So this was for real property. So this is kind of the same thing that they're trying to do, just done in a little different way. Instead of saying the absolute value or the amount that you pay can only go up so much each year, or the increase can only be so much each year. In Missouri, it was the assessed value could only go up so much each year. So you didn't have those sticker shocks. And so it allowed people to stay in their houses, and it gave you a remedy if you didn't like what your assessment was changed to. You could take that and have it adjudicated essentially by a third party.
So you're here in Utah. Do you have other representatives that are at the legislature in other states right now?
What do you mean?
Well, you're here for Libertas, and you're here at the Utah legislature. Is somebody at the Texas legislature?
Oh, so I have a team of 2 people that they're the ones that take our ideas to those other states. We don't have anybody stationed specifically for another state. So those 2 people, they split the country up, east and west. And so one of them actually lives here in Utah, the other one lives in Phoenix, and it just so happens that's just where they live. They don't need to be here. The one that lives here in Utah, he's actually thinking about moving to Texas, and he's a musician on the side, and so Austin has a pretty dynamic music scene, and he wants to get involved in that. But that'll put him closer to the East Coast, where he actually operates, in the Southeast and the East, and so it'll be easier on him for all the travel and whatnot.
So you guys are traveling quite a bit then?
So yes, they do travel quite a bit, and so but we don't have somebody stationed in any given. So
are you working on any bills in California, helping
California,
do that?
No. They're not, for whatever reason, they're not really amenable to what we're pushing. Which is funny because when it comes to privacy, the city of Oakland actually has really good privacy protections, and it's because of what some of their constituents experienced from the state years ago and from the federal government. We're like, we don't want any of that stuff going on here. So in the city of Oakland, they're actually pretty good on privacy. So it's weird where you find these little pockets of liberty in places that you don't expect. Yeah, I know. The sun comes out, everything looks great. But it's very hit and miss. So we, like I said before, we go to fertile states that are fertile grounds that it will accept our ideas, and it just kind of depends on what it is, what the policy is. I think we're hoping to revamp some of the policies that we pushed to other states this year, just because some of them have kind of run their course. We'll still work on them if needed, but I think we have some, like the military crosswalk, that could be huge for veterans, and that's not to say that we have to do it in other states. These states could just pick it up and do it themselves. Because as a legislator, I remember I would read all kinds of things, and I would see, oh, this is going on in that state? That sounds neat. We should do that here. And I would just file a bill. And it's like, we're going to try this. We're going to do this. So it doesn't have to be a group pushing it, but sometimes that's what's needed to at least give the nudge. Say, hey, have you heard about this? Here's an idea. And then somebody's like, yes, that's an awesome idea. Well, let us
do you
help
find that legislators are finding out that you're carrying enough weight that they really start listening to you?
Yeah, that's the part of the snowball effect, when we can go in and say, look, we got this passed in these states, and this is going great for them. Contact this legislator, and ask them about it. They're the one that carried the bill in their state, and speak, straight with them about how it's going. And so the success builds on success. It's our own little pyramid of impact. You start at the bottom, and you do it here. We call it a nail it and scale it model. We nail it in Utah, prove that it works, and then we can scale it to other states.
This is Uriah Kennedy with God and Country, and one of the main reasons why I live in the great Rocky Mountains of Utah is because I am constantly getting out into the mountains and going hiking, camping. There is nothing, absolutely nothing that I enjoy more than getting out and hiking the great landscapes that we have here. From the great national parks we have, Bryce Canyon, Zions Canyon, to the great mountains of hunting and fishing here in the Uintas and other major attractions we have in the Rockies. Everybody has the ability to get out and just enjoy the great outdoors across this country. One of the best and only ways to do that is with the proper equipment. You have to go out with the proper equipment, whether that's tents or sleeping bags or coolers or lanterns or cooking utensils or apparel that you need to keep yourself warm or keep yourself dry. It doesn't matter what it is. We know that Coleman makes everything, absolutely everything in the outdoor arena. I have used Coleman products since I was a little kid, and now I'm sponsoring them. Everybody knows and trusts Coleman. Coleman's been around for generations. Your parents have had it. Your great-grandparents have had it. Coleman has been around for a very, very, very long time, and we all know the Coleman products. We want to thank Coleman for helping us with this channel. We would ask you to click on the QR code that's popping up on your screen or the link that is in our description and go to Coleman using the QR code popping up on your screen or the link in the description to buy all your outdoor needs and equipment from Coleman. It has to go through our QR code or through the description in order to support this channel, so we would ask you to support the channel. Click on the QR code or the link in the description and get all your outdoor equipment, your tents, your sleeping bags, your camping utensils, anything that you possibly need for the great outdoors. Get it through the QR code or the link in the description.
And as we get more successes.
How big is the Libertas staff right now? How many people do you guys have?
Within the Institute, I think we have 9.
9?
Yeah.
So pretty small then.
It is pretty small.
It's called efficiency.
Efficiency.
And so we get interns that help us out from time to time.
Oh, that's great.
And we try to expose them to as much as we can. We have them writing articles. My intern this last year, he was really excited because he helped do the military crosswalk. He actually wrote some of that, our privacy bill. He did some of the research for that, and he wrote some of the language for that, and he's a BYU student. He's like, this is awesome. I never thought I would have this kind of impact. I'm like, yeah, this is what we do.
It's wonderful.
You can do as much as you want to, or as little as you want to, and you might not be around a whole long, but we're going to give you the opportunity to be successful, learn new things, and have an impact on what we do.
Now, when I first heard about Libertas, I told you what I was given it for is as a delegate, sometimes we can't find all the information about how our legislators voted on certain bills, or we don't have the time to manage all these bills. And I would go look at your report card at the end of the session and use that for next year.
Yeah.
Tell the viewers a little bit about that.
So there are certain bills that we look at throughout the session that we deem important. Things that we want to track, things that we want to be involved in. Some of those we support, some of those we oppose. If there are bills that we oppose, before we let the public know that we oppose those, we will go to this, or speak out on them, we will go to the sponsor and say, hey, we've got an issue with your bill. Can we sit down and talk about it? Here's where we disagree with you. Would you be open to changing it? So, because we don't want to oppose your bill, we'd much rather have a bill that we can at least be neutral on, or make it better, and make it to something we can support, But there are times when that's just not going to work. And so then, after we've spoken to them and we've agreed to disagree, then we will put that on our tracker to the public saying, we oppose this bill. So if you go to our website, Libertas Institute, there's a public tracker there where you can see everything that we're tracking and what our position is. And there's a description of the bill. If you hover over the bill number, there's a description on there of what the bill does and why we have the position that we do. And so at the end of the year, after the session is over, we'll look at all those bills that we were tracking, and we'll look at everybody's votes, and we give them a grade. Did they vote with us or against us? And we let the public know what that is.
And what I love is it's independent of any political party. It's just on your 5 keystones, right?
Yeah, and so it's our policies, but it's our beliefs. Freedom, liberty, innovation, things of that nature. That's the lens that we're looking through when we grade these bills. Is government giving us more freedom, or are they taking it away? Are they making it harder for you to live or easier for you to live? That's how we view these things.
We're becoming more intrusive or less intrusive?
Exactly. And so, it's not usually malicious. They're trying to solve a supposed problem, but sometimes they're making a mountain out of a molehill, and it's not really as big a problem as what they think it is. But we can agree to disagree. That's one of the things that I really learned as a legislator. I used to get so mad at my fellow legislators when they didn't vote the way I wanted them to, or they weren't the same kind of conservative as I was. Their definition was a little bit different, but I realized that we have different temperaments, talents, and convictions. We come from different places. We have different experiences. We represent different districts. My rural district was different from somebody else's rural district. I lived in cow country, and they may live in soybean country. It's a different kind of living. It's still farm country, but it's very different actually. And so we have different experiences that lead us to believe different things or look at things through a different lens. And so I had to accept that it was just going to be different. That we were going to have to disagree. And what really helped me materialize this in my head is I asked myself the question: have I ever changed my mind? Well, of course I have. That means I disagreed with myself. So if I disagree with myself, and that's okay, what makes me think that nobody else is going to disagree with me? It's going to happen. And so you make your case, you make your argument, hope they'll change their mind, but at the end of the day, they're going to do what they're going to do. And so we look at it as we're not out to denigrate anybody, we're not out to call people names, drag anybody through the mud. We don't play in elections. We don't get involved in elections.
Mm-hmm.
We're going to work with whoever is here. And so we know because of that, it doesn't do us any good to call anybody out. It never did anybody any good to call me out as a legislator. If anything, it entrenched me in my view. If you were going to come sabotage me in a committee and never come talk to me and tell me that you don't like my bill, then we get into committee and you start tearing it apart. I'm like, why didn't you come talk to me? No, I'm not going to work with you now because you just did this on purpose, trying to torpedo me. So I go out of my way. I've told all of us that work here, go out of our way to talk to everybody first before we let the wide world know that we're going to oppose something, because there's a lot of times, there's a lot of bills that don't show up on our tracker that we have worked on behind the scenes to get it to a place of neutrality so we don't have to oppose it. We don't necessarily support it, but we at least don't oppose it.
Yeah, I can see what you're saying there.
Right? And so there's no reason for us to throw it out on a tracker. Oh yeah, we hate this bill.
It keeps you with a good reputation too.
Right. And we're honest brokers, right? And as an organization that advocates for certain points of view, all we have is our integrity. If we lose our integrity, we've lost everything, right? So if we come up here and we lie, if we cheat, we steal, whatever it is, we become, pariahs in this building, and then we have no reason to exist because nobody's going to pay attention to us.
Yeah.
So all we have is our integrity at the end of the day. That's all of us, and we have to show some humility that we can get it wrong, and it's okay. You have the right to be wrong. I don't care what anybody says. You have the right
Nobody's
to be wrong.
perfect.
Nobody's
You can't
perfect.
even claim to be so.
Right? We're all capable of redemption, and we're humble enough, at least I hope we are, to admit that, our idea there, it didn't work out. We were wrong, let's learn from it and move on, right? And so we hope the same thing with some of the things that get passed that we disagree with. I'm not hoping that anybody gets hurt or anything like that, but when it goes wrong, I'm not going to go, ha 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 ha, you got it wrong, you guys suck, you should have listened to us. It's like, okay, that didn't work. Maybe we try a different way.
Yeah.
And that's it. There's ways to do this job that makes it much easier to do the job. There's ways to do this job that makes it much harder. And I think if we all think about the easier way to do things, it's not calling people out, it's not calling people names, it's not denigrating them. They're people too. We're all God's children. We're all equal in the eyes of God, right? And so if we can remember that when we're talking about people, when we're talking about these things,
Yes.
in general, we all want the same things. We just disagree on how to get there. Some people want to go this way. Some people want to go that way. We just got to figure out a way to get there if we can. And we'd be much better off for it. As a country. Just as neighbors.
Well, things wouldn't be so divisive as they are now.
Right. I mean, there's always been division.
Yep.
As long as there's been man and woman, there's been division. It's just going to happen. But if we can remember that we essentially invented this place to adjudicate those differences. We do it here so we don't do it out in the streets where it gets really ugly. We do it here, we disagree, and it's going to happen. Things aren't always going to go your way. It's going to happen. You got to figure it out, live with it, accept it. That you're not going to get everything you want. You don't get everything you want in any other walk of life. Why is it going to be any different here? But you do it here, you make your argument, you do your best, and if people don't agree with you, well, you just keep trying. Figure out a different way to attack the problem. But you do it here, not out there. That's essentially...
Yeah, we're not
essentially-
entitled to everything going our way.
Well, there's only about a week left to the session up here now. What do you still trying to accomplish? What do you want to have accomplished within this next week?
So the military crosswalk is not completely done yet. They have to finish the budget. They have to fund that extra person for Doppel before the House can pick it up and pass it. So we're waiting for that to happen. That should come probably Wednesday next week. So that can happen. The micro school bill, it passed today because it did not have a fiscal note. I don't know if a lot of people know this, that if a bill has a fiscal note of more than $20,000, it has to be passed in the budget before the bill can be passed. Otherwise, it can't be considered. They'll not pass bills that include spending that's not funded. In Missouri, we did it all the time. And it just, those bills, I don't know how many laws are on the books in Missouri that it's like, yeah, we're going to have this
no money
program.
behind it.
There's no money behind it, but it's sitting there. Yeah, it's taking up space in the statutes. We still have the land use bill with Senator Fillmore that includes the ADUs. That's still going. We're hopeful that's going to get done. That was a consensus bill. Same thing with the privacy bill, because we worked on that with law enforcement, with the Attorney General's office. It's just making its way through the process. So those are the ones we still have left that we're confident that we'll get across the finish line. And those small changes within the Utah Fits All scholarship that are coming down the pipe. I haven't seen them all yet. But from what I'm hearing, they're all pretty acceptable, and we think that'll make it through just fine as well.
Excellent. Well, we greatly enjoyed having you on.
Yeah, thanks for having me on.
It's a lot of
You're a great
information.
human.
Tell my wife that.
Well, it's a lot of information for the public, and a lot of them will think, "Oh, that stuff's boring. I don't actually want to listen to all that." But if you're not involved, then you're just helping out the wrong side of the situation. We found out a lot with Prop 4. There's a lot of people out there who said, "Well, I don't get political. I don't get involved. I don't care." If you don't care, if you're not involved, then You're to blame for when bad
But
things
you're the
happen to good
first one
people.
there to complain afterwards.
Yeah.
I used that excuse a lot when I was in office. I'm like, if you're not going to pay attention, actually read the bill, don't come complain to me. Read the bill, and then complain all you want.
Yeah.
You know, that was one of the first questions I asked. Did you read the bill?
And don't complain after it happens, because you had your chance to make it, to voice your opinion.
Yeah.
To get your voice heard. And there's just a lot of people who don't care. Well, again, greatly appreciate being on board today. And
Thanks for
we'll
coming
look
on.
forward to these bills actually getting done, because I think they're good bills.
Yeah. Thanks for having me. I'll be happy to do it again sometime.
We'll put the link at the bottom in the notes.
Particularly for the books.
Yeah. Tuttle
Yeah.
Twins.
Yeah,
Great stuff.
The Tuttle Twins. Everybody should get the Tuttle Twins. They're an awesome set of books.
Yeah, absolutely. And we'll have more coming out, you know, all the time. Probably 1 or 2 books a year.
That's
Yeah.
awesome.
That's great. Yeah, they're a great set of books. All right, greatly appreciate it.
Yep,
We'll talk to
thanks
you
a
next
lot.
time.
Appreciate it. Thank you.
Thank you.
Great. That was our conversation with Libertas. And as you can see, they're working on a lot of things. Only 9 of them, but yet they're trying to make an impression across this entire country. A lot of things going up here in the Senate and the House meetings right now. We've been hearing the beeping going on down there all day long about how the votes are going on. So we'll see how many of these bills actually make it to the finish line and how many of them get postponed till the next session.
This is what it's all about.
Yep, that's what it's all about.
If you want to belong to a republic, you should be participating and informing yourself about these bills and how they affect your life, because they do affect your life.
They affect everybody's life. You can't just sit on the sidelines and say, I don't get political. It's
And
going to
then
affect
complain
everybody.
when things don't go your way.
Or go anyway, right? Anyway, like, subscribe, and share us. Make sure we're getting out there. We need your support. We need your help at getting this thing out, because we get plenty of suppression on YouTube. 2 weeks from now, probably only a week from the time this thing comes out, so a week from the time that this video comes out, we're going to be back here again, down in the newsroom with our big town hall that we're going to be discussing with about DEI, CRT, and suicide specifically in our schools. So if you want to join us, you're free to come here. It's going to be on the 13th at 11 a.m.
Super important topic.
Super important topic. Right after that, we're going to be having a surprise podcast, because there's a couple of court hearings going on right now about the whole signature process with Governor Cox. And we're going to discuss what happens in those court hearings. So look forward to that.
And then we can discuss what's going to happen with our lieutenant governor, who is now being sued by the DOJ.
Yeah, now being sued by the DOJ. Look down below, get the merch, support the channel, give us some donations. We could use all the support we can get, and we'll see you on the next video.